The morning after a funeral always feels wrong, like the world should stop, stand still for at least a day. But no, the sun rose over Farmington as usual. Bright light shone through the thin curtains of the guest room. My guest room, my former home. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching a worn photograph of Orville, taken when he was about 15. A smiling boy with hair sticking out in all directions and knees covered in scratches from constant falls from his bike. My son. Now he's gone. I am 42 years old. Too early for an aneurysm. The doctor said it happens. Unpredictable. Like that makes me feel better. There was a clinking of dishes downstairs. Enid was making breakfast, probably just for herself. Since Orville was gone, she'd stopped inviting me to the table. It was as if his death had freed her from the need for any semblance of decorum. Yesterday at the funeral, she stayed close to me. She accepted condolences with a sad face. Sometimes even took me under her arm, pretending to be a caring daughter-in-law. But I saw her expression change when she thought no one was looking at her. Relief, impatience, planning. I carefully placed the picture on the nightstand and slowly rose. My joints were protesting after a day on my feet yesterday. 68 was not an age where you could stand for hours without consequence. The robe hung on a hook near the door, the only one I'd been assigned in this room, the room where Orville used to keep his sports trophies and stamp collection. It had become mine 2 years ago when I'd moved here after Ebenezer died. Putting on my robe, I walked over to the window. It overlooked the backyard with the flower beds I'd planted 30 years ago. I'd renew them every spring with tulips and daffodils, and in the summer with petunias and velvets. Ebenezer always joked that I could make even a stick bloom. Now the beds were overgrown with weeds. Enyad wasn't interested in flowers. A waste of time, she used to say. When Ebenezer and I built this house, I was sure I would spend the rest of my life here. We planned it, discussed every detail, and chose the materials. This was our project, our future. I never thought I would feel like a stranger here. The sound of footsteps on the stairs made me step away from the window. I quickly sat down in the worn chair and picked up a book, pretending to read. The door opened without a knock. "You're not coming down," Aniad said. Not a question, a statement of fact. I'm not hungry," I replied, not lifting my eyes from the book. She leaned against the door jamb, arms crossed over her chest. "We need to talk to Lula." I looked up slowly. I need to look as collected as ever. Dark hair, neatly styled, discreet makeup hiding the signs of sleep deprivation. The black dress for the funeral had been replaced by a strict navy blue suit. Work clothes. She was going to the office as if her husband's death was just a minor inconvenience to her schedule. "About what?" I asked, closing the book. "About your plans," she said in the business-like tone she used when discussing real estate values with clients. It wasn't a good time, but we had to be practical. I could feel the anxiety building inside. Something in her tone, in the way she avoided my gaze, spoke of an impending storm. "My plans?" I asked again. "Yes." Enid tapped her fingers impatiently on the door jamb. "I thought it would be best for you to move into a nursing home. There's a nice place on the north side of town with all the amenities. I've already made inquiries." The room seemed to sway around me. She planned this while her husband's body, my son, was still in the ground. I hadn't thought about moving," I mumbled, trying to deal with the shock. "Of course you hadn't," she said, a condescending tone in her voice. "That's why I took it upon myself. There are too many stairs for someone your age. And besides," she paused, choosing her words. "Besides, I'm planning to sell the house," she said simply. "The market's good right now. I could get a decent sum and move to Highland Park. Highland Park is an upscale neighborhood in Farmington, a place where doctors, lawyers, and successful businessmen lived, not mailmen like Orville or real estate appraisers like Enid." She'd always strived to look richer than she actually was. But this, I stammered, trying to find the words. This is our home. This is where Orville grew up. Was it your home? She corrected me. You gave it to Orville, remember? And now it's mine. The memory hit me like a physical blow. 2 years ago, after Ebenezer died, I had indeed signed the house over to Orville. It seemed like the right thing to do at the time. I was heartbroken, terrified at the prospect of living alone, and Orville offered to move in with them. Well, take care of you, Mom, he said. I agreed, thinking I would live with my family, surrounded by care and love. The reality turned out to be different. Soon after moving in, I realized that Annie had seen me as nothing more than a burden, a free babysitter for their daughter Selina when it suited her, and was invisible the rest of the time. I remember, I said quietly. But I didn't think that I'd put you out on the street. Ernie had grinned. I wasn't going to. Not while Orville was alive. He wouldn't have let it happen. But now we have to be realistic. I can't keep this house alone. And frankly, I don't want to live here. Too many memories. The hypocrisy of those words burned me. She never appreciated this house. Never treated it as a place filled with history and love. To her, it was just real estate, an asset. I can help with the expenses, I offered. I have a pension. It's not enough, she cut me off. And it's not just about the money. I need to move on, start a new life. Without me. The unspoken word hung in the air. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Only a week ago, Orville had been alive. We'd had breakfast together in the kitchen while Enidad got ready for work. He joked about the new mail delivery route, talked about the dogs that greeted him on different streets. I was helping Selina with her history homework. Everything seemed normal. And now I can't move in right now, I said, feeling my voice shake. I need time. Of course, I need to agree with fake sympathy. You have a week. A week? I asked, not believing my ears. But that's impossible. Where would I go? I need to find a place to live. Organize the move. You only need personal belongings at the nursing home. Inad shrugged. There's furniture there. Anything that won't fit can be sold or given to charity. I felt anger building inside me, a feeling I hadn't felt in a long time. How dare she treat me as if I were old furniture that needed to be gotten rid of? I built this house. My voice hardened. Ebenezer and I picked out every detail. For 30 years, I put my heart and soul into it. You can't just... I can, she interrupted me. Legally, I own the house. You arranged it, Tula. And to be perfectly honest, her voice grew colder. You've been a burden to our family long enough. Orville was too soft to tell you that I wasn't. I felt the blood drain from my face. A burden. That's what I'd been to her all this time. I never wanted to be a burden, I whispered. I thought I was helping Selina with the housework. Helping? I need to snort it. You cook food that no one wants to eat. Your help with homework only confuses Selina. You're constantly rearranging my things, claiming to be putting things in order. And those flowers of yours everywhere, they make me allergic. I've told you that 100 times. Every word was like a whip. I was trying to help, but I guess I was just causing trouble. Maybe she's right. Maybe I really am a burden. Yeah, I'm sorry, I said, feeling the tears coming. It doesn't matter anymore. Enid looked at her watch. I have to go to work. I have 2 appraisals today and a meeting with a potential buyer. I'll be back late, so don't expect me for dinner. She turned to leave, but stopped in the doorway. And Tallulah, she added over her shoulder. Don't tell Selina about the move. I'll explain it to her myself when the time comes. With those words, she walked out, leaving me alone in a room that was never truly mine. I sat still, listening to her walk down the stairs to the front door open and close to the engine of her car start. Only when the sound of the car died did I let myself cry. Not out of resentment, Though Enie's words hurt deeply, I cried at the realization of my own naivety. How could I not see what was happening? How could I have willingly given up my home, relying on the promise of care? Memories came flooding back. Here I am, crossing the threshold of this house for the first time. A young woman with little Orville in her arms and a pregnant barrel. Ebenezer smiling, proud of our new home. Here we are planting the first trees in the yard, a maple and an apple tree. Here's G taking his first steps in the living room, and we all applaud, laughing at his surprised face. And then, more recent memories. Enie systematically removed my pictures from the walls, replacing them with her own. My cookbooks moved from the kitchen shelf to a box in the basement because they make a mess. My collection of porcelain figurines boxed up and sent to the far corner of the garage because they collect dust. I remembered how I was gradually pushed out of the common spaces of the house. At first, politely, "Tula, would you mind watching TV in your room?" "Orville and I want to be alone." Then, not so polite. "Your books are taking up too much space in the living room." And finally, simply established facts. "This isn't your kitchen anymore, Tula. You don't cook the way our family likes it. Our family like I wasn't a part of it." Orville saw this but preferred not to interfere. "Mom, you know how she is. Just ignore her," he'd say when I tried to complain. My gentle conflict-avoidant son. He loved me. I know he did. But he also loved a quiet life, and confronting Enie meant living in a constant storm. I rose slowly from the chair and walked over to the small dresser where I kept my things. I opened the top drawer and pulled out a scrapbook of photos, one of the few that had stayed with me instead of going to the basement. Flipping through the pages, I stopped at the picture taken the day Ebenezer and I signed the deed to the house. We were standing in front of the porch, still unpainted, holding the keys and smiling like kids. This was our place, our sanctuary, and I gave it away voluntarily out of fear of being alone, out of a desire to be near family. The irony was that I was still alone here, maybe even lonelier than if I'd stayed on my own. At least there I could keep my dignity. I closed the album and returned it to the drawer. I went to the window and looked out into the backyard. The apple tree we'd planted with Ebenezer still stood there, sprawling and strong. It will outlive us all, I thought with a bitter smile. 1 week. I had a week to pick up the pieces of my life and find a new place, at 68 with a small pension and a broken heart. You have a week to move out. Those words rang in my head like a sentence, but something inside me, something that had been asleep for a long time, lulled to sleep by the desire to please and not cause trouble, began to wake up. I remembered who I was before I was Grandma Tula, before I had become a convenient piece of furniture in someone else's home. I was a land records archivist, a person who knew how papers and laws worked, a person who always had a backup plan. And suddenly I remembered something else, something that Enya didn't know, something that even I had forgotten in my grief and confusion. A clause in the deed of conveyance, a small insurance policy I'd included on the advice of Zipporah, my colleague at the archives. Just in case, she said at the time, you never know how life will turn out. How right she was. I went to my bag, pulled out my phone and found Zipporah's number. It was time to remind myself who I really was. I'm Tula Travers, and this is my home. The Farmington Land Records Archives was housed in an old brick building near the centre of town. It had once been a bank, as the high ceilings and massive columns in the lobby reminded me. I hadn't been here in almost 8 years since I had retired, but stepping through the threshold felt like I'd never left. The same smell of old paper and dust, the same creaky wooden floors. Even the clock on the wall, big round with Roman numerals, seemed to tell the same time as it had on my last day at work. I nervously pulled on my grey suit, the only formal wear I'd kept since retiring. It hung in the back of my closet, waiting for a special occasion, one like today. The young woman at the front desk looked up as I approached. Her face didn't look familiar. "What can I do for you?" she asked with a polite smile. "I'd like to see Zipporah Wilmot," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Does she still work here?" "Miss Wilmot?" "Yes, of course. Do you have an appointment?" "No," but I hesitated. "I'm Tula Travers. I worked here until I retired. Zipporah and I were co-workers." The girl's eyes widened in recognition. "Oh, Miss Travers, Zipporah talks about you a lot. Wait a minute, I'll call her." She reached for the phone and I felt a strange warmth at the thought that Zipporah still remembered me. We had once been not just co-workers, but close friends. Life had divorced us. First my retirement, then Ebenezer's illness that required constant care, then the move to Orville and Eni. Our regular lunches turned into occasional phone calls, and then those were gone. "She'll be right down," the girl said, hanging up the phone. "Have a seat, please." I settled down on a hard chair in the waiting area, looking around the lobby. The archives had been modernised. There were computers on desks, electronic boards with queue numbers, surveillance cameras in the corners. But the essence of the place remained the same. Here was the property history of an entire county, captured in deeds, and wills. For 25 years, I worked among these documents, first as a simple archivist, then as deputy head of the Land Registration Department. I knew every nook and cranny of this building, every peculiarity of local real estate legislation. People came to me for advice, respected my opinion, valued my experience, and now here I sat, nervous and unsure, waiting for help with a case I once would have solved in minutes. Tallulah Travers. I don't believe it. I looked up and saw Zipporah coming down the wide staircase. She hadn't changed much over the years. The same red hair, now starred with grey, gathered into a practical bun, the same bright beads over her blouse, the same energetic gait. I rose to meet her and we embraced. "Zipporah, it's so good to see you." "Likewise, darling," she pulled back, scrutinizing me. "You look beautiful. But why didn't you tell me you were coming? I would have made time." "It was a spontaneous decision," I said, not wanting to go into details in front of strangers. Zipporah nodded understanding. "Let's go to my office, we can talk there." I followed her up the stairs, past familiar corridors with rows of cabinets full of files and boxes. On the second floor were the staff offices. Zipporah's office was the same one I'd worked in before, a large room with windows overlooking Farmington's downtown square. "They promoted you to department head?" I asked, noticing the sign on the door. 2 years ago, when Ferguson finally retired, Zipporah smiled, pointing to the visitor's chair. He'd held on to that seat for a long time. "You deserve the promotion," I said sincerely, sitting down. "I always knew you'd take this office one day. It will always be Tallulah's office to me." Zipporah sat down at the table and looked at me carefully. "So, what brings you here today? The last time I saw you at Ebenezer's funeral." "Yes," I nodded. "Too long ago. I called a few times afterward, but your sister-in-law said you were busy or on vacation." I pressed my lips together. Aniot had never relayed to me that Zipporah had called. Another petty cruelty I hadn't noticed at the time. "Orville died," I said quietly. "A week ago, I had an aneurysm." Zipporah's face changed, filled with genuine sympathy. "Oh, Tula, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. He was such a good boy." "Yes, he was." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "And now Enyid wants to kick me out of the house." I briefly told her about yesterday's conversation, about the ultimatum, about Eni's plans to sell the house and move. That woman has always been cold as a fish. Zipporah shook her head when I was done. "But even from her, I didn't expect such callousness to give you a week after your son's funeral. She's never hidden the fact that I'm a burden to her." I sighed. "It's just that Orville used to be a buffer between us. Now there's nothing holding her back." "What do you plan to do?" Move in with Bal or G. I grinned bitterly. Bal lives in a tiny apartment with her husband and 3 kids. And G, I shook my head. You know what he's like. Always in debt. No stability. He didn't even show up for his brother's funeral, some important landscaping project he was stuck on. Zipper snorted. That boy had always been selfish. I remember when he demanded money for college and then dropped out after a semester. He's just different. I automatically defended my son, even though I knew in my heart that Zappara was right. G was always thinking about himself. So what are you going to do? Zappara repeated. Are you really going to move into a nursing home? I straightened up in my chair, pulling myself together. No, I came here to find the deed transferring ownership of my house to Orville. Remember when you advised me to include a special clause? Zipporah's eyes lit up with understanding. The return clause? Of course I remember. It was my idea. She leaned forward. So, you put it in after all? You didn't change your mind at the last minute? I did, I confirmed. Orville didn't know anything about it, though. I thought, I thought it was just a precaution. He'd never kicked me out of the house, so why should he know about the legalities? You were right, Zipporah nodded vigorously. You always have to have a backup plan, especially when it comes to real estate. I told you not to give up ownership completely, especially at your age. She fell silent, realizing how that sounded. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. It's okay. I smiled weakly. You were right. I shouldn't have signed the house over to Orville. It was a mistake driven by grief and fear of being alone. But now we can make it right. Zipper arose resolutely from the table. If the reversion clause was included in the contract and the conditions for its activation have occurred, the house can legally revert to you. That's exactly what I hope. I nodded. But I need your help. I don't know where to find the original document or how to properly activate this clause. Leave that to me. Zipper headed for the door. Let's go to the archives. I think I know where to look. We went down to the first floor and walked through the hallway to the far side of the building where the main archive was located. A huge room with rows of metal cabinets filled with documents. It should be in the private property section, Zipporah said, moving confidently between the shelves. The Oakwood neighborhood, if I remember correctly. Yes, Oakwood Heights, 12 Maple Street, I confirmed. Great. Then this must be. She stopped in front of one of the cabinets and opened a drawer. Here transactions for the last 5 years are alphabetized by the owner's last name. Zipporah thumbed through the folders quickly, muttering to herself. Tracy Trench Travers. Here it is. She pulled out a thick folder and carried it to the nearest desk. We both leaned over the documents. Okay. This is the purchase agreement when you and Ebenezer first purchased the property. This is the building permit. And here's what we need. A deed of gift from you to Orville. Zipporah unfolded the document a few pages filled with legal language. I looked at my signature at the bottom of the last page and remembered the day I'd signed those papers. It was 3 months after Ebenezer's death. I was heartbroken, disoriented, grateful for Orville's offer to move in with them. Here it is, paragraph 7. Zipper's finger pointed to a paragraph in the middle of the document. The giver reserves the right to cancel the gift and regain possession upon the occurrence of the following circumstances. Death of the giver without lineal descendants. Demand by the giver or his heirs that the giver be evicted from said dwelling unit. Written refusal by the giver or his heirs to fulfill their obligations to maintain the giver. She looked at me. The second clause is just right for your situation. Enid is demanding your eviction, so you have every right to activate that clause. But she hasn't evicted me yet, I objected uncertainly. She just told me I had a week to leave. That's enough, Zipporah said firmly. The clause refers to a demand for eviction, not an actual eviction. A verbal demand to vacate the premises within a week would clearly fall within that definition. She turned the page. Look, here's the procedure for activating the clause. You need to file a quitclaim deed with the recorder's office. Attach a copy of this deed and a written justification as to why you're activating the reversionary clause. Written justification? I asked again. What exactly am I supposed to write? Are they just the facts? Zipporah shrugged. After your son died, his widow demanded that you vacate the house within a week, citing your intention to sell the property. No emotion, just facts. She tapped her finger thoughtfully on the page. There's one problem, though. The deed has to be notarized, and that can take time. You've only got a week, and Ennead is sure to antagonize you when she learns of your intentions. She didn't know about the return clause, so I reminded her. Orville didn't know, so she doesn't know either. That's good, Zipporah nodded. But once you file, she'll be notified as the current owner. She'll have the opportunity to challenge the decision in court. I felt the confidence that had begun to grow inside me fade again. And then what? A long legal battle I couldn't afford? Not likely. Zipporah shook her head. The clause is legally sound, but the process could drag on for months, and all that time the status of the property would be uncertain. She thought for a moment, then her face brightened. Wait, there is another option. Do you remember Judith Hammond? She worked as a notary in the Eastern Branch. Vaguely, I admitted the tall woman with the short haircut. That's the one, Zipporah nodded. She has her own notary office now, and she owes me a favor. I think I can get her to notarize your papers right away. Maybe even today. You'd do that for me? I felt tears of gratitude come to my eyes. Of course, Zipper squeezed my hand. We archive girls have to stick together, don't we? Now let's make copies of this document and make a statement. I have all the necessary forms in my office. We went back to her office and spent the next 2 hours filling out the paperwork. Zipporah typed up the deed of gift, and I described the situation in detail. After Orville's death, Eni had demanded my eviction, intending to sell the house that had been my family nest for 30 years. Good. Zipporah looked over the finished documents. Now I'll call Judith and see if she can see us today. While she talked on the phone, I looked out the window at Farmington's downtown square. People went about their business. Cars drove by. Life went on. And I sat here clinging to the chance to keep my home, my independence, my dignity. Great news. Zipporah hung up the phone. Judith can see us in an hour. Her office is only 3 blocks away. In the meantime, she glanced at her watch. I suggest lunch. There's a cafeteria in the lobby. They have good food. Thank you, Zipporah. I tried to put all my gratitude into those simple words. I don't know what I would have done without you. Don't be silly, she said. You would have done the same for me. Besides, it's nice to see you becoming the Tula I knew again. The determined, strong woman, not the quiet grandmother Eni wanted you to be. In the cafeteria, we ordered sandwiches and coffee. I found I had an appetite for the first time in days. You know, Zipporah said as we settled at a table by the window. Everyone who has worked with you still remembers you with great respect, especially the younger employees you trained. Rachel Donovan is now in charge of the West Branch, and she quotes you all the time. Rachel? I smiled, remembering the insecure girl who came into archives right out of college. I always knew she had great potential. You had a talent for seeing the best in people? Zipper took a sip of coffee. And that didn't just apply to co-workers, but to visitors as well. Remember old man Pritchard who came in every Tuesday with a new conspiracy theory about his neighbours? Only you could calm him down and explain that no, the neighbours hadn't tampered with the deeds to his property. I laughed for the first time in a long time. Oh yes, Mr. Pritchard. I wonder if he's still alive. Quiet. Zipporah nodded. Still coming in now with theories about global warming. Clive takes him in, and every time he comes out of there looking like he's been through a natural disaster. We continued to reminisce about old times, and with each story, I felt a part of me return to the woman I was before I moved in with Orville and Enid, before I allowed myself to become inconspicuous and comfortable. After lunch, we went to Judith Hammond's notary's office. Her office was in a modern glass and concrete building, the opposite of an old-fashioned archive. Judith was exactly as I vaguely remembered her, a tall, energetic woman with short grey hair and a penetrating gaze. Tallulah Travers. She shook my hand. Zipporah's told me a lot about you. It's nice to finally meet you in person. Thank you for seeing us on such short notice, I said. I always have time for Zipporah's friends. Judith smiled. Besides, she'd mentioned that it was urgent, and that it involved unscrupulous behaviour on the part of relatives. I can't stand it when people take advantage of vulnerable elderly family members. We were seated in her office, and Judith scrutinised all the documents we had brought. Everything is in order, she finally concluded. The refund clause is correct, and the situation you describe clearly falls within the terms of its activation. I will certify your application, and you can file it at the registry office today. Today? I didn't expect it to happen so quickly. Of course, Zipporah interjected. The sooner we file, the sooner the process will begin, and the less time Annie has to realise her plans to sell the house. Judith nodded. Your friend is right. In a case like this, speed is crucial, especially if your sister-in-law is already in contact with potential buyers. I remembered Enid's words about meeting with a potential buyer today. The fear that she might sell the house right out from under my nose gave me resolve. Okay, let's do it today. Judith pulled out her notary stamp and prepared all the necessary forms. I signed the documents in her presence, and she authenticated them with her signature and seal. Done. She handed me a folder of papers. Now you need to take them to the registration office before the end of the day. I'll walk you there, Zipporah offered, and I'll help you fill out the forms. We thanked Judith and went to the registry office, which was only a block away from the notary's office. There we were met by a young clerk who, recognising Zipporah, was very attentive to our case. Miss Wilmot, good to see you. What can I do for you? We need to file a petition to resend the gift and repossess the property. Zipporah placed our documents on the counter. All the forms are filled out. The application is notarized. The clerk looked at the paperwork, checked the database on his computer, and nodded. Everything is in order. It will take us some time to process, but a tentative decision can be made within 3 to 5 business days. A notice of application will be sent to the current owner. What if the current owner tries to sell the property before the judgment is rendered? I asked, feeling my heart clench with worry. It will be noted in the system that the property is restricted due to the pending change of ownership application, the clerk explained. Any attempt to sell will be suspended until the dispute is resolved. I exhaled with relief. At least Enid wouldn't be able to get rid of the house quickly. Thank you, I said, signing the last form. It was starting to get dark when we left the registration office. It had been a long and emotionally intense day, but I felt strangely exhilarated. What now? I asked Zipporah when we stopped on the sidewalk. Now you go home and wait, she smiled, emphasizing the word home. Enid will get a notice probably tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. Be prepared for a confrontation. I'm scared, I admitted. I'm not sure I can stand up to her face to face. You can, Zipporah said confidently, squeezing my shoulders. You're stronger than you think. You always have been. You just let yourself forget it. I nodded, feeling the determination building in my chest. And remember, Zipporah added, you're not alone. I'm on your side. If you need help, legal or moral support, I'm here for you. We hugged goodbye and I headed for the bus stop. Conflicting feelings fought inside me, fear of the inevitable confrontation with Enid and newfound confidence in my righteousness. I activated the repossession clause and filed the paperwork. Now all I could do was wait and hope that the law I had served my entire career would side with me. Returning home after visiting the archives filled me with a strange mixture of anxiety and determination. The front door seemed both familiar and foreign at the same time, a threshold between my past and an uncertain future. I paused in front of it, clutching copies of the documents in my bag like a talisman. It was quiet inside. Enid was probably still at work, and Selina wasn't due back from school until an hour later. I looked around the hallway perfectly clean, like the pages of an interior design magazine. No personal belongings, no signs of life. Enid had always cared more about appearance than comfort. There used to be a wooden bench that Ebenezer had made with his own hands, a place where we took off our shoes, where the kids dropped their backpacks when they came home from school. Enid had got rid of it a month after I moved in, saying it didn't fit the concept. I went up to my room, changed into my homemade clothes, and just sat on my bed for a while thinking. Now that the first step had been taken, now that the paperwork had been submitted, I could feel something long forgotten inside. Awakening, a desire to act, not just go with the flow. The decision came spontaneously. I went down to the basement, a damp, poorly lit room where many had gradually moved almost all of my belongings, leaving only the essentials in the room. Turning on the dim light bulb, I looked around. Along the walls were boxes labelled with my handwriting, photo albums, books, souvenirs. In the corner cluttered 2 rolled-up rugs that had once graced the living room. A closet filled with clothes I wore too infrequently to keep upstairs. An antique clock inherited from my grandmother, now dusted on a shelf, stopped forever. In the far corner I noticed a familiar basket, wicker with a worn leather handle. My needlework basket. I walked over and opened it, feeling my heart clench at the memories. Inside were colourful scraps of fabric, spools of thread, scissors with mother-of-pearl handles, thimbles, needles, and a little pad Barrel had made in elementary school. The tools I used to create patchwork quilts for each family member, costumes for school plays, curtains for every room in our house. I pulled out a basket and, without thinking twice, carried it upstairs. On the way, I grabbed another box labelled personal photos. The same box that Enid had removed from prominence, claiming the photos created visual noise. In the living room, I looked around, deciding where to place my treasures. The strict minimalism that Enid had favoured left little room for individuality. Grey sofas, a glass coffee table, a few abstract paintings on the walls, all impersonal, fitting perfectly into the pages of a fashion catalogue. I set the basket of needlework next to a chair by the window, a spot that overlooked the backyard. I used to sit here often watching the kids play, Ebenezer fiddling with his tools in the garage. From the box of photos, I pulled out a few frames, a wedding photo with Ebenezer, a shot of all 3 kids at a picnic when Orville was 12, Barl 15, and G 8. A picture of my parents taken on their 40th anniversary. I arranged them on the mantelpiece, crowding out the knickknacks Enid had bought on sale at an expensive store. Then I went back to the craft basket and pulled out an unfinished project, a patchwork quilt I'd started before Ebenezer died. I hadn't had the energy to finish it then. Now unrolling the fabric, I felt my hands recall familiar motions. The scraps gathered from each family member's old clothes formed an intricate pattern. The story of our lives captured in the fabric. Here's a piece of Ebenezer's shirt that he used to go fishing in. Here's a scrap from Orville's first suit, worn to his high school prom. Barl's floral pattern dress that she wore as a teenager. G's t-shirt with the logo of the rock band he idolized when he was 14. I picked out a new patchwork from a dress that had recently stopped fitting me and began sewing it into the pattern. With each stitch, I could feel something inside me healing. a sense of control over my own life returning. I was so engrossed in my work that I didn't notice the front door slam, and Celine, my granddaughter Orville, and Enid's daughter entered the house. Grandmother. She stopped in the doorway of the living room, looking at the changes with surprise. "What are you doing?" Selina, a 13-year-old replica of her mother with the same dark hair and weary eyes, looked genuinely puzzled. "Hello, darling." I smiled at her. "I just thought I'd do a little sewing. Would you like to see it?" She hesitantly approached, looking curiously at the variegated fabric in my hands. "Is it a patchwork quilt like in the old movies?" "Exactly." I showed her how the different pieces fit together. Each piece is a part of our family's history. For example, your first school uniform was made from this fabric. Selina gingerly touched the flap and recognition flashed across her face. "I remember that dress." It prickled. "Yeah, you were always complaining." I laughed. "Your father even tried to soften the collar by rubbing the laundry conditioner into it." At the mention of Orville, Selina's face darkened. She pulled away as if burned and muttered, "I have homework to do." I wanted to stop her, to say something comforting, but the words stuck in my throat. How do I talk about loss with a child when I haven't learned to deal with it myself? Selina quickly left upstairs and I went back to sewing, feeling a prick of guilt. Maybe I'd been too preoccupied with my own problems and hadn't paid enough attention to my granddaughter's grief. Orville was a good father, caring, patient, always finding time to play and talk. His absence must have created a huge void in Selina's life. I decided to talk to her later when the pain wasn't so fresh. In the meantime, I continued sewing, stitch by stitch, reconnecting with my old self. Time passed quickly, and I awoke to the knocking at the front door. Enid had returned from work. I heard her walk through the hallway, setting down her bag, taking off her shoes. Then the footsteps approached the living room, and there was silence. "What's that?" There was an undercurrent of irritation in her voice. I looked up from my work. Enid was standing in the doorway, arms crossed over her chest, her gaze shifting from the basket of needlework to the photograph on the mantelpiece. "Good evening, Enid," I calmly continued sewing. "How was your day? What's all this about?" She ignored my question, pointing at the pictures. "I thought we agreed that these things would be stored in the cellar." "We didn't," I objected softly. "You decided, and I didn't object. Now I've decided differently." Her eyebrows rose in surprise. In the 2 years we'd lived together, I'd rarely crossed her, preferring to give in to keep the peace. "Why?" She stepped closer, hovering over me. "You're moving soon. What's the point of making a mess?" "I thought I had a right to spend my last days in this house in comfort," I answered, keeping my eyes on my sewing. "These things are important to me." Enid snorted. "Is that why you decided to clutter up the living room? I'm going to show the house to potential buyers. They need to see the space, not your sentimental knickknacks." "Buyers?" I deliberately pretended to be surprised. "Have you found a new place to live yet?" "Not yet," she said, a little embarrassed. "But I'm looking at options, and the sooner I sell this house, the more options I'll have." I nodded, continuing to sew. "I understand, but while I'm here, I'd like to feel at home." It's not that Enid started irritably but cut herself short. "It doesn't matter. Do whatever you want to do. Everything will be back to normal in a week anyway." She turned and headed for the stairs, but stopped and added over her shoulder, "By the way," Baal called, "they're coming over on Sunday. Get ready. She wants to talk to you about future plans." With those words, she left upstairs, leaving me alone with my thoughts in the patchwork quilt. Baal is coming over. My eldest daughter, always practical and sensible, is probably already making plans for my future. Enid had probably contacted her with the news of the impending eviction. I put away my sewing and closed my eyes, remembering Baal. She had been a serious child as a child, always with a book, always with a plan. "Mommy, I made a schedule for the whole summer," she'd say at 10, showing me a neat spreadsheet scrolled by the hour. Unlike impulsive G and dreamy Orville, Barl always knew exactly what she wanted. She grew up just as determined, graduated from college with honours, built a career in the insurance company, married Noah as practical and rational as herself. They have 3 children, twins Iris and Tobias, who are 10 years old, and 8-year-old Prudence, the perfect family, just like in the publicity picture. But our relationship was always complicated. Barl valued me as a grandmother to her children, as a source of practical help, but was rarely interested in my thoughts or feelings. Our conversations revolved around children, recipes, the weather, superficial topics that didn't require emotional intimacy. After Ebenezer died, Barl helped with the funeral, organised the wake, sorted through his things all clearly and efficiently. But when I cried at night, she would say, "Mom, you have to be strong. Tears won't help," as if grief was a weakness to be overcome by willpower. When I moved in with Orville, Barl approved of the decision. "It's better for everyone," she said. "You won't have to live alone, and Orville and Enid will get help with Selena." Help with Selena? That's what I was. A handy tool, a function, not a person with her own wants and needs. Sunday came all too quickly. I spent Saturday continuing to settle the house anew, getting a few more boxes of personal belongings out of the basement, arranging my books on the bottom shelf in the living room, and hanging my favourite seascape painting in the hallway. I watched this with growing irritation, but didn't interfere, probably thinking it was easier to tolerate a week than to cause conflict. In the morning, I got up early and made breakfast. Blueberry pancakes, my grandchildren's favourite dish from Barrel. Enid came downstairs as I was finishing and looked at the table set with bewilderment. "Why so much food? Barl said they'd be here for dinner." "I thought Selena might like pancakes," I said, pouring coffee into cups. "Selena doesn't eat pancakes." Enid cut her off. "She's been on a gluten-free diet for 3 months. I told you about that." I froze with the coffee pot in my hand. Enid had mentioned something like that, but I'd been so preoccupied with Orville's illness that I hadn't paid much attention. "I'm sorry, I forgot," I mumbled, feeling useless. "The usual," Enid sighed, taking her cup and walking off with it into the dining room where her laptop stood. I stayed in the kitchen looking at the pancakes that no one would eat. Another reminder of how distant I've become from my own family, how little I know about their daily lives. Barl and her family arrived at exactly noon, precise as a clock. I opened the door and was immediately assaulted by a double hug from the twins. "Grandma!" Tobias shouted, wrapping his arms around my waist. "Do you have any cookies?" Iris asked practically. Prudence stood behind them, more reserved like her mother, but with a warm smile. "Hello, grandmother." She dutifully handed me a small bouquet of wild flowers. "These are for you." "How sweet, my dear." I accepted the flowers with rapt attention. "Thank you." Barl was the last to enter, followed by Noah laden with bags. My daughter looked exactly the same as always. Perfectly styled brown hair, a minimum of makeup, a strict dress of muted colour, a businesswoman even on her day off. "Mom," she gave me a quick hug. "How are you holding up?" A standard question to which a standard answer was expected. "I'm doing fine," I said, stepping back to let them into the house. "Is Innie at home?" Barl looked around. "Yes, she's working in the dining room." Barl nodded and headed that way, leaving the children with me. I took them into the kitchen where I made the promised cookies and lemonade. "Is Grandpa Orville really not coming back?" Tobias asked as we sat down at the table. "No, honey," I patted his head. "He's gone where they don't come back from." "Like great-grandpa Ebenezer," Iris said, always striving for accuracy. Yes, like great-grandpa, I confirmed, feeling a lump in my throat. But we'll remember him, won't we? Prudence looked at me seriously with her big eyes, so much like Barrel's when she was a child. Of course, darling, we'll always remember him. At that moment, Barl and Enid entered the kitchen, immersed in conversation. Consulted with Martin. He says it's a good option, Barl said. A lot of my clients are very happy with it. Sounds good. Inad nodded. As long as it's not too far from you or me in case of an emergency. I tensed, realizing they were discussing my future residence. Children, Barl turned to her offspring. Go play in the living room. We need to talk to our grandmother. Tobias and Iris reluctantly got off their chairs and Prudence followed, casting me an apologetic glance. As soon as the children were out, Barl sat across from me, her hands folded on the table, a posture she adopted before important conversations. Mum, Eni had told me about the situation with the house, she began without preamble. I realise this is a difficult time for all of us, but we must be practical. Practical? I repeated, feeling the familiar irritation building inside me. Barl was always practical, even when the situation called for emotional involvement. Yes, she nodded, not noticing my tone. I've been making inquiries about nursing homes in the area. There's a great one called Sunny Slopes. It's 20 minutes from us. They have good reviews, medical staff on site, and lots of activities for the residents. How much does it cost? I asked, knowing that for Barl, the financial aspect always comes first. Your pension should be enough for a basic package. She pulled a booklet out of her bag and placed it in front of me. If you sold some of your furniture and personal belongings, you could raise an extra amount for a down payment. I slowly turned the glossy pages of the booklet. Smiling elderly people were playing board games, doing light exercises, sitting in chairs in the garden, all clean, neat, impersonal. What about me living on my own? I asked, raising my eyes to my daughter. I could rent a small apartment. Barl and Anid exchanged glances, the kind of silent communication that always made me feel excluded. Mom, be realistic. Barl placed her hand gently but firmly on mine. You're 68. You had a blood pressure incident last year. It's not safe to live alone. What if you fall? What if you get sick at night? I'm not an invalid, Barrel, I objected, releasing my hand. A lot of people my age live on their own, and a lot of people get into trouble because there's no one around, she countered. Besides, at Sunny Slopes, you'll be among people your own age, new friends, socializing. I don't want new friends, I said stubbornly. I like the old ones. Barl sighed with the look of someone explaining the obvious to a child. Mom, it's out of the question. You need somewhere to live in a week. Enid has her own plans for this house. We don't have room in our apartment. G has, well, you know G. He didn't even come to his brother's funeral. I said exactly. Barl nodded. So a nursing home is the best option. I've already arranged a visit tomorrow morning at 10. We'll go, look around, fill out the paperwork. It was decided without me. As usual, always thought she knew what was best for me, ever since she started criticizing my choice of clothes and hairstyle when I was 15. What about my stuff? I asked, pointing to the booklet. It says the rooms are furnished. Where will the rest of it go? Most of it will have to be sold or given away, Barl said practically. The rooms are small. Only the essentials will fit. My books, photographs, my china collection. You can have the photographs, of course. Barl clearly didn't understand my concern. A few books too, but collections. Mom, be realistic. There just wouldn't be room. I felt panic rising inside. All my life I'd collected these things, each with its own story, its own meaning, and now I was being told to get rid of them like they were junk. Barl, I can't. Mother, she interrupted me with a slight impatience in her voice. I know it's difficult, but it's just stuff. What's important is that you're safe and getting the care you need. At that moment, Iris ran into the kitchen. Mom, Toby has climbed up on the cupboard and won't come down. Barl jumped up. Sorry, I'll be right back. She walked out quickly, leaving me alone with Enid, who had been watching our conversation in silence the whole time. She's right, you know, Enid said after a pause. This is the best option for everyone. For everyone or for you? I asked quietly. Enid shrugged. What's the difference? The result is the same. You get the care and we get the peace of mind, knowing you're safe. There was no emotion in her voice, only cold logic, as if it was about moving furniture, not a person's life. From the living room came the shouts and laughter of children, then Baal's voice calling for order. I got up and went there, leaving Annie at the table. The living room was in chaos. Tobias was sitting on the top shelf of a bookcase, waving a toy airplane around. Iris was bouncing around at the bottom trying to reach him. Prudence was quietly reading a book in the corner, ignoring the commotion. Baal stood in the middle of the room with her arms at her sides. Tobias Hawksmoor, come down at once. You could fall and hurt yourself. I won't, the boy showed his tongue. This is great. If you don't come down right now, we'll go home without dessert, Baal threatened. I walked over to the cupboard and calmly said, Toby, remember how we made a kite with you last summer? The boy stopped waving at the airplane and looked at me with interest. Yes, with a red tail. I still have some paper and sticks left, I continued. We could make a new kite, a bigger one, but you'd have to come down. Tobias thought for a moment, then nodded and began to climb down carefully. Baal picked him up when he was halfway down. Thank you, Mom. She nodded appreciatively at me. Toby, what did I say about climbing on furniture? That it's dangerous and rude, the boy mumbled. I'm sorry, Mom. And apologized to Grandma too. Baal looked at her son sternly. This is her house. I'm sorry, Grandma. Tobias lowered his head. It's okay, honey. I stroked his hair. Let's go to the garage and see if we can find materials for the kite. Tobias and I headed to the garage where I did indeed find some leftover kite materials. Iris soon joined us and we settled in the backyard creating new toys. The kids were absorbed in the process and I watched them while thinking about my life. These moments creating something with my grandchildren, seeing their smiles, teaching them new things are what gave me joy. There will be no such moments in a nursing home. Perhaps they would come once a month sitting in a sterile room, talking awkwardly under Baal's supervision. Through the open kitchen window, I could hear the voices of Baal and Enidia discussing the details of my move. They were talking about me as a problem to be solved, not as a person with her own desires and feelings. And in that moment, looking up at the sky where our homemade kites were soon to take off, I made a decision. I will not let them run my life. I will not let Enid kick me out of the house I built with Ebenezer. I will not let Baal send me to sunny slopes and forget about me, remembering me only on holidays. The papers that Zipporah and I filed at the registry office were my salvation. All I had to do was wait for the result. Grandma, look. Tobias picked up the finished kite. He's the coolest. Yes, honey. I smiled at him. It's beautiful. And so was the freedom I was about to regain. The week flew by in a strange suspension of disbelief. I kept moving my things from the basement to the living quarters, as if gradually reclaiming territory. Annie had watched this with growing irritation but didn't interfere. Why argue when there were only a few days left? She spent most of her time at work or in her room avoiding unnecessary contact with me. Selina kept a weary expression. I tried to get her talking to get her involved in the patchwork quilt, but her grief for her father created an invisible wall between us. It's okay, Grandma. Just a lot of studying. She would reply to my invitations and retire to her room. On Wednesday, the third day after applying, I got a call from Zipper. Your application has been approved, Tula, she said with undisguised triumph in her voice. I just got a copy of the decision. The house is officially yours again. I sank back in my chair, my legs aching. So soon? I thought it would take longer. The clause was worded perfectly, Zipporah explained. Besides, Judith knows someone at the registry office, and they've prioritized your case. Enid's notice should come today or tomorrow. Thank you, Zipporah, I whispered, still in disbelief. I don't know how to thank you. Just invite me to the housewarming party, she laughed. Or rather, a homecoming. The notice came the next day, a large formal envelope addressed to Aniad. I saw the mailman drop it in the box, but I didn't take it out. Let things take their course. Enid came home late from work and apparently didn't check her mail. She left early on Friday, mentioning a meeting with a potential home buyer and a realtor. I nodded silently, knowing that the meeting no longer meant anything. By the weekend, Enid had become visibly nervous. I could hear her on the phone discussing the strange delay in the sale of the house. I don't understand why there's a restriction mark in the database. She was telling someone, my lawyer is figuring it out. On Saturday, she left to see that very lawyer and came back stone-faced, walked past me without saying a word, and locked herself in her bedroom. I knew she knew, but I decided to wait for Enid to bring it up herself. On Sunday, she didn't leave her room until lunchtime. Selina asked me if Mum was okay, and I said that adults have hard days. In the evening, Enid came downstairs, ate dinner with us in silence, and went upstairs again. And then Monday came, the day my deadline expired. Enid left for work without saying goodbye. Selina went off to school. I was left alone in the house preparing for the inevitable confrontation. I spent the entire day perfecting my position. I got copies of all the documents, laid them out on the coffee table in the living room. I made tea, not ordinary tea, but good tea from a special porcelain teapot that Enid had put away in a faraway closet as too old-fashioned. I put on my best house dress, a dark blue one with a white collar, a gift from Ebenezer for our last birthday together. At 5 o'clock sharp, I heard the sound of a car pulling up, unusually early for Enid. She usually didn't get back until 6. Then came the pop of the trunk, and I realised she'd brought boxes for my move. She must have figured that if I didn't pack it myself, she'd help me with it. I was sitting in a chair by the window, cup of tea in hand. When the front door opened, there was a sniffle, a rustle. Enid was dragging something heavy in, then the clatter of folded boxes thrown on the hallway floor. Tallulah. Her voice sounded businesslike. Are you home? In the living room, I said quietly, taking a sip of tea. Enid appeared in the doorway holding a stack of folded cardboard boxes. Her gaze travelled from me to my cup, then to the open book on the arm of the chair, and finally to the fully furnished room where there was no sign of gathering. What's going on? She asked, and there was bewilderment in her voice. You haven't packed. I set the cup carefully on the saucer and looked at her. No, Enid, I'm not moving anywhere. She blinked as if she didn't understand. What do you mean you're not moving? We talked about this. The deadline's today. I remember our conversation. I nodded. But circumstances have changed. Enid threw the boxes to the floor and crossed her arms over her chest. What circumstances? Baal has reserved a place for you on the sunny slopes. You need to check in tomorrow. It's settled. It's decided by you. I corrected her gently, not by me. She had a look on her face that I knew well. A mixture of irritation and condescension. The way she used to explain to me why my preferences and desires didn't matter. Tallulah, she sighed as if speaking to a cranky child. We've already discussed this. You don't have a choice. I'm selling the house. I have an appointment with the buyers on Wednesday. I don't understand why there's a problem with the paperwork, but my lawyer is handling it. It's already been resolved. I pointed to the papers on the coffee table. Take a look for yourself. Enid frowned, but walked over and picked up the top document. Her eyes ran quickly over the text. Then she grabbed the next sheet and the next. Her face grew paler with each passing second. What is this? She finally squeezed it out. Some kind of joke? Not a joke. I looked at her calmly. This is the official decision of the registry office to return ownership of this house to me, Tula Travers, in accordance with Clause 7 of the Deed of Gift dated March 18th, 2022. What other clause? 7? Enid had frantically thumbed through the papers. What are you talking about? When I signed over the house to Orville, I explained, still calm, I had included a special clause in the deed. It provided that under certain circumstances I could regain possession of the property. One of those circumstances was a request for my eviction. Enid had stared at me, and understanding gradually appeared in her eyes. Did you? You planned all this? Her voice trembled. From the beginning? Number. I shook my head. I'd included that clause as insurance, hoping it would never be needed. I trusted that Orville would never kick me out of the house. Orville never kicked you out, Enid exclaimed. I did. I kicked you out. And you used it against us. Against you, I corrected gently. Orville was gone. And yes, I used my legal right to protect myself from being evicted from my own home. Enid threw the papers on the table and started pacing the room like a hunted animal. That's impossible. My lawyer will think of something. Such stunts can't be legal. Quite legal. I took another sip of tea. The documents are legally correct and already registered. The house belongs to me, and again she stopped and stared at me with unconcealed anger. You can't do this, not to me. Not now that Orville is gone. Why not? I asked, and my voice got firmer. Because it disrupts your plans. Because you've already envisioned yourself in a new house in Highland Park. Because you promised my daughter you'd save her from having to take care of the problem in her mother's face. Were you eavesdropping on our conversations? Enid had clenched her fists. There's no need to eavesdrop on what is said in the open, I replied. You and Baal have not been particularly secretive about your plans for me. Enid sank to the couch, her shoulders slumped. What now? She asked after a long pause. Throw me and Selina out on the street. Take revenge for me wanting a better life for you in a nursing home. A better life? I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. You never thought about what was best for me, Enid, only what's more convenient for you. That's not true, she threw her head up. I have always taken care of you, letting you live here in our home. My home? I corrected it quietly. The house you gave to Orville? Enid raised her voice, voluntarily. And now that he's gone, you've decided to take it all back, leaving Celine and me with nothing. What kind of mother are you after that? What kind of grandmother? Her words were calculated to hurt, and they hit the mark. I felt a pang of doubt. Maybe I was being selfish. But then I remembered all the humiliations of the last few years, all the small and large cruelties of the Enies. And my doubts melted away. I'm not leaving you with nothing, I said firmly. You have a good job savings. You can find a new place to live, and I'm giving you 2 weeks to do it. A lot more time than you've given me. 2 weeks? Enid had laughed, but there was no mirth in her laughter. Do you really think I can find suitable lodgings in 2 weeks in the middle of Selina's school year? You're a professional real estate appraiser, I reminded her. If anyone can find a place to live quickly, it's you. Enid stood up and walked to the window, turning her back to me. Her shoulders were tense, her arms crossed over her chest. All these years, she said quietly, almost in a whisper. I've put up with you only for Orville's sake. He was so worried about you after your father died. Mama can't do it alone. Mama needs her family around her. And I knew it, that you'd be in the way. She turned to me and I could see the hatred in her eyes. You interfered with everything. Selina's upbringing, my relationship with Orville, even the way I arranged the furniture. With your outdated views, with your endless reminiscences of the good old days, I felt like a guest in my own home. This has always been my home, I said quietly. I built it with Ebenezer. My children grew up here. Every corner holds memories. Memories? Enyad splashed her hands. Always those damned memories. You know what Orville said to me when I suggested remodeling the kitchen? Mum's so used to this layout. When I wanted to rearrange the living room furniture, Dad's chair was always by the window. When did I suggest selling the house and buying something newer? This is where the soul of our family is. She slammed her fist on the windowsill. Always you and your precious traditions. Even when you weren't around, you controlled our lives through Orville's guilt. I sat stunned by her rage. Never before had Enid spoken so openly. All these years she had hidden her true feelings behind a mask of polite condescension. And only now, when the mask came off, did I see the depth of her resentment. I didn't know Orville felt guilty, I said after a pause. I had never wanted it. But you took advantage of it, Enid grinned bitterly. Oh, how skillfully you played the part of the helpless widow. Orville, dear, I just don't understand how this new stove works. Orville, darling, could you take me to the doctor? And he could never say no to his precious mommy. Her words hurt me, partly because there was some truth in them. I really had relied on Orville more than I should have, letting myself become dependent, afraid of being alone after Ebenezer's death. I loved my son, I said quietly, and he loved me. Of course he did. Enid shrugged. But do you know the difference between us, Tula? I loved Orville enough to let him live his life, and you loved him enough to tie him to you forever. That's not fair, I said, tears welling up in my eyes. Fair? She cut me off. And you know what? I prayed. Yes, I prayed for you to leave, that you find a friend and move in with him, that you'd decide to come back to your hometown. Anything to get you out of our lives? She paused, her voice quieter, but no less venomous. And when Orville died, I felt grief as well as relief, because I could finally be rid of you without his eternal objections. I stared at her, shocked by the cruelty of those words. Enid had spoken of the death of my son, her husband, as an opportunity to get rid of me. You're a terrible person, I whispered, feeling a tear roll down my cheek. Maybe, she shrugged, but I'm an honest person. I've never pretended to like having you in my house. I put up with you for Orville's sake, and now that he's gone, now you want to throw me out on the street. I finished for her. Sell the house I built and forget that I ever existed. Yes, Enid replied simply. That's exactly right. Because you are nothing to me, Tula. Just an old woman with whom the only thing I had in common was my husband. And now that connection is gone, I rose slowly from my chair, feeling not anger but a strange calm growing inside. It was as if Enid's candour, cruel as it was, had finally shattered the false construct in which we'd both existed for the past few years. You're right, I said. There is no connection between us. There never was, except for my son. But this house is my connection to the past, to the life I built with Ebenezer, to the memories of the children who grew up here. And I won't let you take that away from me. I walked over to the table and gathered my papers into a neat stack. You have 2 weeks, Enid, until the 15th. After that, I expect you and Celine to vacate the house. And if I refuse, she raises her chin defiantly. If I sue, if I tell everyone what a heartless old woman you are, kicking your own granddaughter out on the street after her father died, then you'll lose in court, I replied calmly. Because the law is on my side. And as for public opinion, I shrugged my shoulders. I don't care what people who don't know the truth think. Enid stared at me for a long moment, as if seeing me for the first time. You've changed, she said at last. Before you would have given up. Cry. Beg. I used to be a different person, I agreed. Scared, dependent, willing to endure humiliation for a roof over my head, but not anymore. I headed for the door but stopped on the threshold. One more thing, Enyad. I'm not kicking Selina out. She can stay to live with me if she wants to. After all, I am her grandmother, and this house is part of her inheritance too. Enid's face contorted with rage. Never, she said through gritted teeth. My daughter will never stay with you. I'd rather live in my car than let you take Selina away from me after you took the house. I'm not taking anyone away. I shook my head. I'm just offering you a choice. And I didn't take the house. I gave back what was rightfully mine. I walked out of the living room, leaving Enid standing in the middle of the room, surrounded by the ghosts of the past and the wreckage of her plans for the future. As I walked up the stairs to my room, I felt strangely light. For the first time in a long time, I acted not out of fear, not out of a desire to please, but out of a deep conviction that I was right. It was like coming home after a long absence, returning to my real self. I walked into the room, sat on the bed, and took a deep breath. The confrontation with Enid had exhausted me emotionally, but I didn't regret anything I'd said. For too long, I'd allowed myself to be invisible. For too long, I'd adjusted to other people's expectations. There were sounds coming from downstairs. Enid was pacing the living room, moving something around, probably picking up papers thrown in anger. Then the front door slammed and there was silence. I walked over to the window. Enid was standing by her car with her hand pressed to her forehead, like she had a headache. Then she pulled out her cell phone and started calling someone, gesturing vigorously with her free hand. I could guess who. Most likely Baal, giving her the unpleasant news about her plans for Sunny Slopes being derailed. Well, let her call. Let her complain. Let her call me a cruel old woman, a selfish, ungrateful mother. I knew the truth. I was defending not only my home, but my dignity, my right to self-determination. Enid ended the conversation, tossed the phone onto the passenger seat, and drove away, taking off abruptly. Probably went to see Baal in person to discuss the situation. I went back to the bed and pulled Ebenezer's picture out from under the pillow, the same one Innie had removed from the wall in the hallway, deeming it too old-fashioned. My husband was smiling from the picture, the wrinkles around his eyes, the grey on his temples, the look of love and understanding. You would have been proud of me today, I whispered, running my finger over his face. I'd finally stood up for myself, and for the first time in a long time, I was sure I was doing the right thing. I'd given Enid 2 weeks to find a new place to live, more than enough time for someone with her resources and connections. I wasn't kicking her and Selina out on the street, not retaliating for years of neglect. I was simply reclaiming what had always belonged to me, my home and my life. They left on the last possible day, the morning of the 15th. 2 weeks passed in tense silence. Enniadid communicated with me only through short notes. The plumber is coming at 10. Selina is spending the night at a friend's house. Don't touch the boxes in the hallway. Selina avoided me. Obviously, having heard the mother's version of events. I didn't try to change her mind. Some wounds take time to heal. Standing at the bedroom window, I watched the movers move the last of the boxes and furniture out of Selina's room. Enid bustled around checking lists and giving instructions. Selina sat in the passenger seat of the car, tucked away in her phone, shutting herself off from what was happening. When the last box was loaded, Enniad looked around the house, a long, evaluating look of a person mentally saying goodbye to something precious. Then she got behind the wheel and the car started, taking them to their new life in a rented apartment on the other side of town. I didn't come out to say goodbye. Enad and I had said everything we wanted to say to each other that day 2 weeks ago. And we'd said goodbye to Selina last night. A brief, awkward conversation where I promised she could always come back if she wanted to. And she nodded without looking up. When their car disappeared around the corner, I went downstairs and walked around the house. What I saw wasn't a surprise, but it was still startling in its petty spitefulness. Enid hadn't just moved out. She'd left behind chaos, like a final act of revenge. Curtains ripped off the curtain rods, shelves and kitchen cabinets removed and thrown to the floor, dresser drawers pulled out. The mattress in Orville and Enid's bedroom is cut open, nails hammered into the walls where paintings used to hang. Paint spilled onto the carpet in the living room. I slowly sank to the bottom step of the stairs, feeling the fatigue set in. There was so much work to be done to make the house look livable again. My 68 years suddenly seemed like an impossible burden. But then I looked up and saw sunlight streaming in through the hallway window. It fell obliquely on the floor, highlighting the dust in the air. It was the same light that had flooded this hallway when Ebenezer and I had first entered the newly built house. "A good omen," he said. Then I stood up, squared my shoulders, and headed to the kitchen for a rag, a broom, and a trash bag. There was no time for self-pity. I spent 3 days getting the house in order. I scrubbed the floors, mopped the stains on the carpet, put the shelves back in the closets, hung new curtains to replace the ones that had been torn down, ordered a new mattress for the bedroom, and plastered over the nail holes. On the 4th day, Zappara arrived to help with the finishing touches. She entered the house with a bottle of wine in one hand and a box of tools in the other. "So, we're really celebrating coming home." She smiled as she looked over the results of my work. "It's not done yet." I pointed to the wall in the living room where Enid had removed and broken a large mirror before she left. "I need to replace it. It can wait." Zipporah sat down in the toolbox and headed for the kitchen. "Now we'll open the wine and toast your victory." We settled at the kitchen table with glasses of inexpensive red wine. To Tallulah Travers, Zipper raised her glass, who proved that it's never too late to stand up for yourself. I smiled embarrassedly, but I clink-ticked my glass with my friends. I don't know if this is a victory. Celine is avoiding me now. Eni is probably telling everyone what a terrible mother-in-law I am. So what of it? Zipper shrugged. You did what you had to do. Protect yourself, your home, your future. It's the right thing to do, Tula, even if some people don't like it. I nodded, feeling warm inside. Not from the wine, but from the words of encouragement. I'd gotten used to doubting every decision I'd made, every wish I'd made. I was used to thinking of myself as a burden whose needs were secondary. It felt good to hear that someone thought my actions were justified. The next day, I went up to the attic and pulled out the boxes of Orville's things that Enidi had put there right after the funeral. Letters, photo albums, school awards, sports medals. Traces of a life lived with passion, but cut short too soon. I went through my son's clothes, inhaling the still lingering scent of his cologne, the plaid shirts he wore to work, T-shirts with the logos of the music bands he loved in his youth, the sweater I knitted him for his 30th birthday. At some point I realized I was crying, not with the despair of the first few days after his death, but with a quiet, light sadness. Orville was gone, but his memory remained. In these things, in the walls of the house, in my heart. Among the clothes, I chose a few things that were particularly associated with different periods of his life. A child's T-shirt with a picture of an astronaut on it. Orville had raved about space until he was 12. The shirt he wore on his first date, the sweater he wore at Christmas, the tie from his wedding. I cut them into neat squares of various sizes and spread them out on the living room floor, trying to find a pattern that would capture Orville's essence, his gentleness, his dependability, his love of simple pleasures. The quilt took 2 weeks to complete. I sewed every day, putting memories and love into each stitch. It wasn't just a way to keep my son's memory alive. It was a kind of therapy to help me accept his passing. I hung the completed quilt on my living room wall, brightly coloured with a pattern of intersecting roads and paths, symbolising Orville's life journey. In the centre is a piece of his wedding tie surrounded by fragments of children's clothes. At the edges are items from his adult closet, each with its own story. The day I finished the quilt, Barl called, "Mom." Her voice sounded unusually uncertain. I heard Enid and Selina moved out. "Yes, a week ago," I replied, preparing myself for a rebuke. "And it's true that you," she paused, searching for words, "that you got your house back through some legal trick." "Not a trick," I corrected her, a legal right spelled out in the deed of gift. The silence on the other end of the line lingered. "Barl," I called out. She sighed. "I didn't expect this from you, Mom. I always thought you were, too soft, unable to stand up for yourself." I finished it for her. "Something like that," Barl admitted. "It's so unlike you." "Maybe you just didn't really know me," I said without rebuke, just stating the fact. There was another pause. "Noah and I would like to stop by," she said finally, "to see how you're settling in maybe this weekend." "Sure," I agreed. "I'd love to see you." When we finished talking, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. On the one hand, Barl didn't judge me as I had expected. On the other hand, I could hear something new in her voice. Caution, maybe even respect. It was as if she suddenly realized that her mother was not just a convenient grandmother for her children, but a person with her own rights and desires. Barl and Noah arrived on Saturday without the kids. "They're at a sports training camp," my daughter explained. I walked them through the house, showing them the changes I'd already made: new curtains in the living room, rearranged furniture in the kitchen, beds of spring flowers I'd started to revive in the garden. "It looks different," Noah said, looking at the quilt on the wall. "More personal." "It's my house," I replied simply. "It should reflect me." Barl sat on the couch, nervously fiddling with her watch band. "Do you really intend to live here alone?" she asked at last. "At your age, it might not be safe." At my age, I raised an eyebrow. "Barl, I'm 68, not 98. I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself. But what if you fall, or you get sick, in the night?" "The same thing any adult would do." "Call an ambulance," I answered calmly. "I have a phone and I know how to use it." Barl looked unconvinced. "Maybe we could hire a caregiver or a companion, someone to check on you at least once a day." "Number." I shook my head. "I want to live on my own, unsupervised." "But, Mom..." "Barl," I interrupted her gently but firmly. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm not helpless. I've lived in this house for 30 years. 28 of them are caring for my husband and children. I know how to run a household." She was silent, clearly unhappy, but she didn't want to argue further. "All right," she said at last. "But what about being alone? Won't you be bored?" "I have friends." I smiled. "Zipporah stops by almost every day. I signed up for the library club. I plan to resume church choir." "Sounds full." Barl looked a little stunned, as if she realized for the first time that I might have a life outside of being a grandmother. "Speaking of busy lives," Noah interjected, "we were wondering if you could babysit next weekend. We have a corporate event very important for Barl's career." "Ah, so that's it." "The real reason for the visit." "Unfortunately, I can't," I replied. "I have a book club meeting on Saturday, and on Sunday I promise to help out at church with the charity fair." Barl blinked in surprise. "But it's just a book club. You can't miss one meeting." "I could," I agreed, "but I don't want to. It's the first meeting, and I promise to bring homemade baked goods." "Mom," Barl said, a familiar note of irritation in her voice, "this is really important to my career. You just need to look after the grandchildren for one day." "Barl," I looked her straight in the eye, "I love your children. I'm happy to spend time with them when it's prearranged and convenient for all of us, but I will no longer abandon my plans at short notice. but you always used to. I used to feel obligated, I interrupted her gently. I felt I had to make up for the fact that I was living in Orville's house. That's all changed now. Barl looked like she wanted to object, but Noah put his hand on her shoulder. Your mom's right, honey. We could hire a babysitter for one night, but babysitters are so expensive, Barl grumbled. No more expensive than my own time, I pointed out. Barl stared at me, clearly not used to that tone. You've changed, she said at last, almost exactly what Enid had said. Yes, I agreed. Change. And that's a good thing. After they left, I felt strangely empty. Talking to Barl had been difficult but necessary. For too long, I'd let the kids see me as a source of free help, rather than a person with their own wants and needs. The next day, G called for the first time since Orville's funeral. Hi, Mom. His voice sounded falsely cheerful. How's it going? I heard you somehow got it out of the house. I didn't, I corrected him. Just gave back what had always belonged to me. Yeah, sure, he laughed. Impressive anyway. I never thought you'd have the guts. That comment prickled, but I decided to ignore it. Why are you calling G? I asked bluntly. What? I can't just call my mum? He feigned offense, but I knew my youngest son too well. Of course you can, but you usually call when you need something. Pause on the other end of the line. Okay, you got me. He laughed again, but less confidently. Actually, I'm having a little financial trouble. A client's been late with a payment and I need to pay my suppliers for the plants. How much do you need? I asked, knowing the answer in advance. Only 3,000. His voice became creepy. I'll pay you back next month. I promise. And now that you have a house again, I'm sure you can afford it. Maybe even put a mortgage on it or something. I closed my eyes, feeling the frustration building inside. Gar had never changed, always looking for the easy way out, always expecting someone else to solve his problems. No, G, I said firmly. I'm not giving you the money. What? He seemed genuinely shocked. But, Mum, it's just a small loan. I'll pay you back. I swear. How did you pay back the previous small loans? I asked. 2,000 for new equipment, 1,500 for office rent, 1,000 for car repairs. Are you keeping score? I could hear the irritation in his voice. Yes, G, I replied calmly. I am now, and I will no longer sponsor your irresponsibility. Is that how it's going to be now? He almost shouted. Now that you have a house, you're suddenly too good to help your own son. I've been helping you your whole life, I said quietly. Maybe it's time you learn to stand on your own 2 feet. Fine, he hissed. Fine, I don't need your money. I'll do it myself. He hung up and I sighed. It was painful, but necessary. G would never grow up if I continued to indulge his irresponsibility. I devoted the next weeks to myself in my house. I revitalized the flower beds in the garden, arranged the furniture just the way I liked it, hung the paintings that had been gathering dust in the basement for years. Every day I did something that reflected my tastes and preferences without regard for other people's opinions. Zipporah came by often, helping with repairs, bringing news from the archives. Sometimes we just sat in the garden with a cup of tea, reminiscing about our youth and making plans for the future. Do you remember Donna Reynolds from the tax office? Zipporah asked one day. She retired last year and now organizes tourist trips for the Silver Age, as she calls it. Next month, a group is going to Savannah for a week. We might be able to join them. A trip, I wondered. I hadn't travelled since my wedding trip with Ebenezer. All the more reason to try it. Zipporah winked. New places, new people. It's part of your new life, isn't it? I agreed, feeling a mixture of fear and excitement, travelling with no husband, no children, just me and my decisions. It was scary and felt right at the same time. Gradually, my social circle expanded. At book club, I met Heather, a retired teacher with a sharp mind and a wry sense of humour. In the church choir, I made friends with Martha and Viola, twin sisters who baked the best cookies in the neighborhood. Judith Hammond, the notary who helped me with my paperwork, invited me to bridge. For the first time in years, I felt like I was not just someone's mother or grandmother, but an independent person with her own interests and connections. Barl called a month after our conversation. "How are you, Mum?" Her voice sounded unusually soft. "I'm fine," I answered. "Just got back from choir practice." "Glee club?" She sounded surprised. "You're singing again?" "Yes," I smiled. Turns out I'm not out of tune. "I'd forgotten you used to sing," Barl said thoughtfully. "I only remember you used to sing to us at bedtime." "I had many hobbies before I became a mother," I said. "And now I'm going back to them." Pause. "Look, Mom," Barl began tentatively. "I wanted to apologize for our last conversation. I was being demanding." "Yes," I agreed. "You were. I'm just used to you always being available, always willing to help. It's hard to adjust." "I understand," I said. "But I hope we can build a new relationship, a more equal one." "I'd like that," she said, sincerity in her voice. "The kids miss you. Maybe we could come over for dinner this Friday night if you're not busy." "Of course." "Friday I have a book club," I replied. "But Saturday is free. Come over for dinner." "Okay." Barl seemed to accept my terms without resentment. "I'll see you on Saturday." I hadn't heard from G since that abrupt conversation, but through Barl I learned that he'd taken a part-time job as a bartender to make ends meet. It was the first time in my memory that he had solved financial problems without asking his family for help. At the end of the second month of my new life, I decided to throw a small dinner party for my new and newfound friends, Zapora, Heather, Martha, and Viola. Judith, women who had supported me through difficult times or had become part of my new life. I made a treat. Nothing fancy, just dishes I loved to make when I was young before Enid's culinary preferences began to dominate our kitchen. Chicken and mushroom casserole, roasted beet salad, apple and cinnamon pie. I set the table in the garden under the old apple tree that Ebenezer and I had planted the first year we lived in this house. The evening was warm with a light breeze carrying the scent of blooming hydrangeas. The guests arrived at 6 p.m. with bottles of wine and small gifts of books, houseplants, and homemade jam. Zipper brought a framed photograph of her and me as young adults, the day I was promoted to Deputy Chief of Archives. "Do you remember that day?" she asked, as I looked at the picture. "You were so confident, so strong." "Do you remember what you said to Ferguson when he hinted that it would be hard for you to balance work and parenting?" "I can handle both." "Unlike you, Mr. Ferguson, who can't handle anything," I quoted and everyone laughed. "This Tula right here has always been inside of you." Zipporah squeezed my hand, just lost for a while. We ate dinner, swapping stories and plans. Heather talked about her travels in Europe. Martha and Viola shared recipes and gossip from the church community. Judith analysed the latest city ordinances with legal precision. At the height of the evening, as the sun began to set, colouring the sky in shades of pink and gold, I looked around the table. Women of different ages and backgrounds, united by friendship and mutual respect. My friends, my new family. "I raised my glass to new beginnings," I said, "and to the fact that it's never too late to start living for yourself." "To Tula," Zipporah added, raising her glass. "My name is Renadi. I am 72 years old, and I am finally, truly free. If you liked my story and the lesson I learned, please consider supporting me by making a donation so I can continue sharing these powerful true life stories. Thank you in advance. And you, what would you have done in my place? I would love to hear your opinion, your advice, or your own similar stories. Please share them with me in the comments below. I'm always curious about what you all think. For more life stories like this, like the video and subscribe to my channel. There are many other stories waiting for you. With heartfelt greetings. Until next time.